Phoebe Stewart, who is our Director of Symposia.
Hi, once again, my name is Phoebe Stewart, and I serve as the Director of Symposia this year. Again, I would like to thank you guys all for coming out and sharing your Wednesday evening with us. Tonight we have the pleasure of having Mr. Eric Opiella. Is that close?
Opiella.
Okay, Opiella, there we go. Representative Jean Wu as panelists for the discussion over voter ID laws. And we have Dr. Brittany Perry serving as the moderator this evening. Dr. Perry is currently a professor in the political science department here at Texas A&M. She has published in American Politics in Congress and the Presidency, and she has begun a new partnership with the Department of Multicultural Services to work in diversifying educational initiatives. Let's welcome our moderator, Dr. Perry.
All right. Well, thank you for this invitation, and thank you to our panelists and to our audience, which is larger than expected. We are here to discuss an issue that's been a topic of discussion and constitutional debate in recent years. At the heart of this debate is the question of preserving the integrity of our elections and protecting the rights of our people. Should we show a photo ID at the polls? Why? What are the costs to minority voters, poor voters, the elderly? Are strict voter ID laws a new poll tax on Americans, as Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis has recently professed? I have Mr. Opiella and Representative Wu to engage in this discussion. Start with Mr. Opiella, and we'll have some time to give your arguments, and then we'll have some discussion and open it up for audience questions.
Thank you, Professor Perry, and thank you all for coming. It is a real treat to see so many students here at Texas A&M who are interested in the civic process. Too often, I remember when I was a student leader at the other school. Y'all can guess now. Okay. Yeah. I was student body vice president at UT in 1999 to 2000. It was like pulling teeth to get students to come out and vote. And I am very excited that all of you are here to learn about our political process, and more importantly, about the important issue of integrity in our elections. Because the faith of the electorate in our electoral process, in our democracy, is driving the effort, not just in Texas, but in states across this nation, to restore the faith in our electoral system, so that people know that the vote that they cast is going to be counted, and that the vote that they cast is not going to be diluted by voter fraud. This is a Texas issue. This is not a partisan issue, and I think that there's too often an effort to make this a Republican versus Democrat effort. But 88% of the voters in the state of Texas, and 95% of Republicans and 80% of Democrats agree that voters should be required to show photo identification to vote. It's a common sense measure that is used in many other areas of our everyday life, including areas involving fundamental constitutional rights. If I want to obtain and carry a concealed handgun or even an open handgun, I have to obtain a photo ID. I have to obtain and show to any peace officer that stops me a concealed handgun license. Looks just like photo ID that's used like a driver's license. In fact, it can be used in Texas to allow you to vote. If I want to fly a plane, I have to have a license to do that. If I want to show up at a bank and withdraw money, I have to show some sort of photo identification. You know, if to exercise my Second Amendment right to bear arms, I have to have a photo ID, wouldn't it be common sense that to exercise my right to vote, I would prove that I am a resident of the state of Texas and show that I am who I say I am, and that there are people who are citizens of the state of Texas electing the people who are voters, who are going to serve in public office, including Representative Wu and other members of the Texas House, all the way down to your local offices. So it's a nonpartisan issue to have a photo identification used in elections. And since we implemented the law after the 2011 legislative session, we've had great success. We haven't seen waves of people being disenfranchised. It's a proven and simple way to prevent electoral fraud and deter it. We have a number of exceptions that are available for people who don't have a photo identification. We have the ability under the law that was passed to vote a provisional ballot. If you forgot your photo identification, come back and present your photo identification, have your ballot counted. Under the court order that was just implemented for the for this November's elections, for the 2016 elections, you can sign an affidavit of reasonable impediment saying that I couldn't find or I couldn't obtain a photo identification, and you will still be allowed to vote. But the casual person who wants to vote for their dead mother or their dead father, or people who are non-citizens who want to vote, are going to be deterred by this very common sense legislation. Before we passed the bill, the State Auditor's Office did a study and found that 1.5 million more Texans have driver's licenses than are registered to vote. In the court cases that evolved after the photo identification legislation was passed, we found that the overwhelming majority of Texas voters have some sort of photo identification. In fact, I'm going to poll everyone in there. How many of you have a photo identification? I probably should have asked it a different way. How many of you do not have a form of photo identification? One person, okay. And that's a good question. Representative Wu asked, well, is that your student ID? For many of you it might be, but how many of you have a form of photo identification that is not your student ID? Okay. So in order to exercise our fundamental rights, in order to exercise our non-fundamental rights, to just live in everyday Texas, we have the photo identification. This is not disenfranchising any Texans. And it's very important that the people of the state of Texas have faith in their elections. And that's why the Texas legislature chose to enact this law in 2011. And that's why we have photo identification in the state of Texas. Texans who have the right to vote should be able to vote with minimum inconvenience. The purpose of this law was not to inconvenience voters in any way. We modeled this legislation after Indiana's photo identification laws, which in April of 2008, by a vote of 6-3, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of, deciding that presenting a photo identification to vote was not too difficult of a burden to place on voters. What's important to note, like I said earlier, this is a nonpartisan issue. Justices John Paul Stevens and Anthony Kennedy, who are two of the more left-leaning members of the Supreme Court, sided with the majority in upholding that law. Now, of course, voter ID laws have been surrounded by controversy since their very inception because there is a perception that they will discourage people to vote. But that simply hasn't happened here in Texas. Turnout in our elections has not decreased since we implemented the photo identification law. It is substantially the same. In fact, in the last presidential election, this past primary that we had in 2016, our voter turnout increased substantially, even though we had photo identification laws in place. Here's a list of 7 life scenarios involving fundamental rights, like voting, that involve some form of identification. Registering for buying guns. We already talked about that. In order to have and purchase and possess and carry, open carry, a firearm in this state, you have to have a photo identification. Welfare benefits. It's not a traditional constitutional right, but in Goldberg versus Kelly, the Supreme Court held that it was permissible for the state of Massachusetts to require photo identification on their electronic benefit cards that grants access to food under temporary aid to needy families, or TANF. Right of assembly. Oftentimes, municipalities require protest organizers to obtain permits to protest in public spaces. While the requirement varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, many of those jurisdictions require presenting evidence of who you are in order to obtain that freedom of assembly permit. The right to marry. When you go to the county clerk's office to obtain your marriage license, you have to present photo identification to prove you are who you say you are when you apply for that license to marry. If there isn't a more fundamental right, as some of the Supreme Court cases we've seen in the last couple of years, than the right to marry, that is a fundamental right that requires photo identification in order to access that right. Freedom of movement. Many of you have gotten onto aircraft. You have to present a photo identification to get on an aircraft in the United States. If you want to exit the United States and return, you have to have a passport. And what's telling is that the United States Department of State does not accept voter registration cards as a form of identification in order to obtain your passport, because there are so many instances of voter registration cards being issued to either people who are not citizens of the United States, but also to people who are not who they say they are, because they can apply on a postcard and have your voter registration card mailed to you without any check of identification. Public accommodations. How many of you have ever checked into a hotel? In fact, many municipalities even require hotels to obtain and maintain a copy of photo identification to be available for review in case there is some sort of altercation at the hotel. Most recently, in the Texas voter identification case, Justice Edith Jones strongly criticized the court's decision to leave the question of this discriminatory intent open as they did. And I want to quote from Justice Jones because it is a very interesting quote. "No one doubts our unwavering duty to enforce anti-discrimination law, but in this media-driven and hyperbolic era, the discharge of that duty requires the courage to distinguish between invidious motivation and shadows. The ill-conceived, misguided, and unsupported majority opinion shuns discernment. Because of definitive Supreme Court authority, no comparable federal court precedent in over 40 years has found a state legislative act motivated by purposeful racial discrimination." In this case, they did not find that the state of Texas was motivated by racial discrimination at all in enacting this law. And she continues, "Even more telling, the multi-thousand-page record yields not a trace, much less a legitimate inference of racial bias by the Texas legislature. Indeed, why would a racially biased legislature provide it for a cost-free election identification card to assist poor registered voters of all races who might not have driver's licenses? Yet the majority emulates the clever capacity of Area 51 alien enthusiasts who, lacking any real evidence, espy a vast but clandestine government conspiracy to conceal the truth." I think it's a sad reflection of the argument against photo identification that they assert that minorities, especially, do not have the ability or the desire to obtain photo identification. I think it's unconscionable, like Justice Edith Jones stated, to infer that because you're a minority, that you somehow do not have the desire or the ability to obtain photo identification. The photo identification law that we passed in 2011, that continues in effect today, is a common sense measure to ensure that Texans have faith in their government. And I welcome the opportunity to have a debate with Representative Wu and justify the law that Texas voters overwhelmingly, both Democrat and Republican, support to this day. Thank you.
We'll figure it out. All right. Oh, while we're getting set up, just a brief introduction. My name is Gene Wu. I'm the state rep for Southwest Houston, House District 137. I am a Aggie, class of 00. I'm also a Longhorn. So I have a degree from my undergrad from A&M, my master's in public policies from UT, and then my law degrees from South Texas College of Law. And now they changed it to Houston
College of Law.
something. I don't care anymore. Anyways, I'm a former prosecutor in Harris County DA's office. Once I got elected, I had to resign from that because conflict of stuff. I don't know. Anyways, right now I just practice law generally while acting as representative. And oh yeah, here's my stuff. Okay. If we turn off the lights, you guys are gonna sleep? That's not an easy one. Is that good? Wait. Are we already moving?
Oh, you, sorry.
Okay. All right. So, okay, we'll do it. All right. So, I know Eric says we're gonna have a debate. You know, dude, they got me to come to this thing at the last moment. I literally slapped this thing together last night, like half asleep. I've got a 2-month-old at home. I'm like half awake right now. So, I only really have one thing I want to present to you today, and it's not arguing really necessarily about voter ID, but I want to prove to you one point, and that's this: election laws are political weapons used to win elections. That's all I want to prove to you. I'm not going to argue with you about whether voter IDs are good, whether they're bad, because good or bad is based on frame of reference. It's based on your relative position. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I'm sure when went to the Boston Tea Harbor, the British weren't very happy to say, "Oh, those terrorists are killing us." Okay, so good or bad is relative. But I want to prove to you this one point. Okay. But before, let's look at one quick thing. And Eric touched a lot on this already. Voting is a constitutionally protected right. The 15th Amendment of the Bill of, not Bill of Rights, 15th Amendment included in it. It says the right of citizens. Notice it doesn't say some citizens, most citizens, probably all citizens. It says citizens, meaning all. Citizens have the right to vote, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And this whole race and color thing is going to come back. Okay? And Section 2 says the Congress can make laws to enforce this. All right. So, one thing I want to get straight off the bat is, I'm not here to argue for voter fraud. Okay? Nobody's arguing for that. What we're saying is, there is a right way to do things, and there is a wrong way to do things. Because Eric is exactly right. Voter ID passed in other states that have been through court scrutiny, and those courts have given those states a thumbs up. And over again, courts, when dealing with Texas's voter ID law, says, look, we looked at all the other states that did this. There is a right way to do this. There is a wrong way to do this. You did it the wrong way. So it's not about the ID itself. It's about process and implementation. How do you make the ID happen? What do you need to prove to get the ID? How is it used? It's about intent and the purpose of it. And so, let's go to this. I'm trying to figure out a way to explain this in a probably really dumb way. Like, you can say, fire, good, you look at all the stuff you can do with it, it's great. And the other side is not saying that fire is bad, we're saying fire is good, but if you use it in really dumb ways, it becomes bad. In the same way, we're not saying that secure elections and getting rid of voter fraud is bad, right? We're saying that's good. But if you create election laws that were specifically designed to purposely discriminate against different groups in order to win elections because of an overwhelming shift in democratic shift, that's bad. And that's what this is kind of coming down to. The election laws are weapons used to win elections, right? So, how do we know this? How do I show you that election laws are political weapons? Let's look at some examples. That's my favorite. You guys are blowing me out in colors. Okay, you can't, it's hard to tell, but this is my favorite, gerrymandering, good old gerrymandering. These are Harris County's state senate districts. If you can't tell, this district runs up here, around, down here, and around, and there's another one inside of it, and there's another one inside of that one. It's like they're all in a loving embrace. Like, you know, like it's like a political fractal, just shapes inside of shapes. Who does this? People who want to win elections.
There's a blue box in there.
Yeah, I know. This just happened last month. Governor of Illinois vetoed an automatic voter registration bill. Voted by 83 to 30 the House, 50 to 7. These are veto-proof numbers. Overwhelming support by a Democratic legislature. Vetoed. It would have put 2 million new voters on registers. But why did he veto it? Because it favors Democrats. Because Rauner is a Republican governor in a heavily Democratic state, and it would have given Democrats more power. This is from my last session, the 2015. Online voter registration dies at the hands of Harris County Republicans. This was a bill that would have allowed you to register to vote online. So you have to fill out those stupid paper cards. And you know why your voter registration stuff is messed up? Is because nobody can read your handwriting. Okay? And this would have fixed it. Because just do it online. Do it on your tablet, do it on your website, or do it online on your computer, and you don't have to worry about that. Bipartisan support, really no serious opposition, but killed. Because Harris County is already a purplish county, that if you put in some more Democratic voters, then this would have helped getting Democratic voters out. Because it would help young voters, it would help minority voters, and poor voters. And by the way, this is a Republican blog, so it's Big Jolly's. You can actually look him up. Big Jolly's a pretty well-known Republican blog. Alabama, this happened last year. I mean, Alabama had essentially the same voter ID law that Texas has, but they did one step better. They said you have to go to the DMV to get a voter ID. So what do? Let's shut down all the DMV stores or DMV offices. They shut down essentially all the DMV offices except for like one. I mean, it's just not even trying anymore, right? So this just happened. This is about a couple of weeks ago. Appeals court strikes down North Carolina voter ID law. This is the quote that is getting a lot of press. The new provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision and impose cures for problems that did not exist. Thus, the asserted justifications cannot and do not conceal the state's true motivations. Why do this? To win elections. All right. So, I could give you another 10, 15 slides on the different types of voter ID laws or election laws that are used as weapons. Some of them are from Democratic sides. Some of them are from Republican sides. When Democrats are in control, they do things to try to either boost up their numbers or suppress Republican numbers. When Republicans are in control, they do the same thing, right? So, all I want to say is, voter ID law that we're talking about is an election law, and like all election laws, it is a political weapon. Let's not be naive about it, okay? But here's the thing, that's not necessarily unconstitutional. The courts have said it is okay to mess with the system to help your party win, right? But remember that 15th Amendment. It says you can't mess with it based on race. The problem nowadays is, after Obama, African Americans vote Democrat about 98% of the time. And Hispanics during 2012 were voting about 76%. And now with Trump on the ballot, it's probably going to also be in the high 80s or the low 90s. So there is not much difference between party and race. So even though you may say, well, we're really doing it, and North Carolina tried to do that. North Carolina argued, look, we're not doing this to screw with people by race. We're doing this because they're Democrats. Those dirty, dirty Democrats, right? And the court says, what's the difference? So, and the point is, Texas could have done it the right way. And how do we know Texas could have done it the right way? Because the courts have told us repeatedly that they could have done it the right way, and they give examples of other states that did it the right way. Every single court that has considered the Texas voter ID law has struck it down. Every single court that has considered other voter IDs similar to Texas around the nation have struck it down. And all the courts follow the same process. They go through, this is their law, this is what it looks like, here's the comparison to other states' laws. And this is what other states did. And these are the courts that found that these other states are okay, these states are not. Texas falls into the it's not camp. Okay? Even the Fifth Circuit, I mean, seriously, for you guys that are going to law school, the Fifth Circuit is like the most conservative circuit in the entire nation, bar none. It's not even close. It's not even a joke. And, you know, the Fifth Circuit telling you you've gone too far is like Ronald McDonald telling you you've had too many hamburgers. Okay? It was rejected by the U.S. DOJ as soon as it was issued, as soon as the law was passed, but that was negated by Shelby versus Holder. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Amendment got killed, and that killed that. But it still went through the courts. It just took a slower path. And again, all of the courts, always in their opinions, note that other states have done this and have done it well, and done it without discriminating. So, let me see this. So, this is actually the federal court ruling, the initial ruling that set this off. It says, court holds SB 14, which is the bill that created the law, creates an unconstitutional burden on the right to vote, has an impermissible discriminatory effect against Hispanics, African Americans, and was imposed with unconstitutional discriminatory purpose. And it's a poll tax. So we can spend after this, we can talk about like why it's a poll tax and how that affects people and why it affects people. It's not about the ID. It's about what you need to do to get the ID. Okay? So here's the question that some of you might be asking. If they know there's a right way and they know there's a wrong way, why do it the wrong way? And it's the oldest answer in history. Because they could. Right? So in 2011, before this legislative session, it followed 2010, when Democrats got their asses kicked to up and down the mountain. It wasn't even funny. It's not even funny. Okay? So Republicans came in, 101 Republicans, 49 Democrats in the House, 19 in the Senate, and 12 in the Senate. This is a supermajority in the House. You don't even need the Democrats to start session. You don't need Democrats to have a quorum. We can just go and play golf, and there will be no difference. And the problem is, this leads to steamrolling. When you have that much power, you have a tendency to steamroll over your opponents and not listen to what their suggestions are. And that's what happened. So other things that the 2011 session passed, they passed the most massive school funding cuts. Probably some of you guys went through that, or you were in high school then. This was a national embarrassment. They passed massive redistricting that is still in litigation today. Okay. Whoops. So, I just want to end with this, kind of make 3 points to this. Election laws are political weapons that parties use to either boost their side or suppress the other side. It shows they're good if they help you, they're bad if they don't. Right? So that's why I said I don't want to have you argue about whether they're good or bad or not, because it depends on your perspective. And it just happens that Democrats generally want more voters, Republicans generally want fewer voters, at least the ones that don't vote for them. Right? So if you look at Democratic states, they do a lot of stuff like automatic voter registration, they do same-day voter registration, they do all this stuff to get people out to vote, because it helps Democrats. It's not because, we say it's because we care, but really, they do it because it's self-preserving, right? And there is a right way to do voter ID and the wrong way to do voter ID. It's just that Texas chose to do it the wrong way. And in fact, the courts actually said that in some of their opinions. And the courts aren't fooled by this stuff. I mean, we can sit here and debate it. We can have a half an hour debate about this. But the courts, like literally, they sit down and they listen to this stuff for months. They have thousands of hours of testimony, boxes and boxes of paper that prove each and every point. They don't get fooled by this stuff. They see right through it. Okay? And also, unchecked supermajorities make you do dumb things. And you know what? Don't forget, and I'm not saying this isn't what I'm going to do, but don't forget, what goes around comes around, right? Democrats used to be in power, Republicans are now in power, Democrats will come back to power. And you know what? When the Democrats come back in power, they'll be the same shenanigans, but just, targeted differently. That's all I got.
So, would you like to take 5 minutes to respond before we open it up to questions? Have a back and forth between the two? Is there certain points that Mr. Opiello you'd like to respond to? Or
Sure.
about 5 minutes back and forth and then open it up for questions?
Yeah, I think Representative Wu makes a very good point that what goes around comes around, and that Democrats are just as likely to engage in weaponization of election laws as Republicans. We see that happen in the states where Democrats have control, and in any event, neither is excusable as a weaponization. But we don't view photo ID laws as a weaponization of election laws, mainly because we modeled this law after the Indiana law, which was upheld immediately before we passed it by the U.S. Supreme Court. There's one difference between the Indiana law and the Texas law. And the Indiana law allows a voter who does not have a photo identification to execute an affidavit at their county clerk's office and vote a provisional ballot. Texas's law did not have that option. Now we have a court order that allows a similar process in Texas. However, the main difference between that and the Indiana law is that allows you to vote a regular ballot versus a provisional ballot. So the main objection I have to voting a regular ballot instead of a provisional ballot is there is no way to unring the bell. When you don't show any form of identification and you execute an affidavit that says, I am Representative Wu, it's pretty obvious that I'm not Representative Wu. But the election judge doesn't have the ability to question that because you don't require photo identification and you vote a regular ballot. If we have a close election, and I litigate election contests for a living. I've represented a number of state representatives and elected officials that have won by 1 vote, or 2 votes, or 3 or 4 votes. It's very difficult for us to unring the bell and find out whether someone who said they were someone but actually weren't can have that vote taken out of the election and the real voter, the true and correct voter, declared. So, to the extent that we'll come back next session and implement the Indiana solution, I think that's probably likely. There's also been a number of other bills that in other states, such as Virginia, that allow additional forms of identification to be considered. We had a talk earlier about student identification that's issued by government institutions, not just the ITT Technical Institute, but
who's out of business?
Who's out of business now, but similar institutions, but an actual governmental institution that has some check on the process. I think that's a reasonable change that can be made next legislative session. But fundamentally, and this is important to note, the Fifth Circuit upheld the constitutionality of the law. They objected to what they said was evidence of discriminatory effect. They never found that there was discriminatory intent, but Judge Ramos showed that there was a potential discriminatory effect. And basing the law on the Indiana law will allow this law to continue and ensure that voters have faith in their elections statewide. I loved the slide that said "bad dancer" on Governor Perry. I saw that. I saw that.
Snuck that in there.
But a number of the points that are on Representative Wu's presentation, I fundamentally agree with. I think that he makes some very good points, and I hope he says the same.
All right, would you like a chance to
Sure.
give some response?
If by any chance you guys ever happen to be disgraced public officials, please don't go on Dancing with the Stars. You guys know what we're talking about? No, you guys have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, he's not a disgraced public official.
Oh, come on.
He couldn't remember three
Things.
departments. Yes.
Governor Perry, our former governor, was on Dancing with the Stars on Monday. So. And I think he got the lowest score of all the meetings.
I don't know. I was thinking five.
That's what,
5 out of 10.
something like that.
It's very telling. You guys know this.
It's political gossip.
Yeah. Y'all don't watch this stuff.
So here's, this is one point I forgot to mention. The Washington Post back in 2014, when we had this voter ID law, it was a big hoopla about it, and other states passed it. They actually did a pretty comprehensive study looking for voter impersonation, right? They went through the entire nation looking for credible examples of voter impersonation. And their conclusion was, out of the 1 billion votes cast in the last 20 years, there were 31 provable examples of voter impersonation. So that's basically like a record that's better than airlines. More planes fly out of the sky than people impersonate other people using voter at the ballot box. And the reason is this, because it's really stupid. Why do that? Most voter fraud happens with mail-in ballots. The vast majority of voter fraud occurs with mail-in ballots. Because why? Because there's no one watching you. You can fill in whatever you want. What happens all the time is one guy will pick up all the mail-in ballots for his relatives, his elderly mom and dad and uncle and aunt, and he'll fill them all out and put a big X on the signature and then mail them in. That happens all the time. We catch people doing it all the time. So why don't we have a voter ID requirement for mail-in ballots?
Would you sponsor that bill next session?
No.
Why not?
Because it ends up disenfranchising other people. But it disenfranchises the wrong people on the other side. Okay? Because, especially in Harris County, who is qualified to vote by ballot? They're generally older, the general people who live in a stable place, and they tend to be white. And they tend to vote Republican. Okay? So, I don't support voter suppression or this any kind of, if you don't want to call it that, I don't support this kind of action for any side. I don't agree with the Democrats doing it, much less the Republicans. So, there's some others. There's some things like, look, if you're concerned about security, like, okay, we have voter ID. We know there's about as secure as you're going to have. Why not have same-day registration? Why not, if you have your photo ID, be able to go to the polling place and vote that day? Why can't you do that? Why wait 30 days before you can vote? What's the purpose? There was a purpose in the past because, the paper, you had to mail it in, the paperwork had to get processed, and they had to check who you are, and they had to put you on the polls. They physically wrote you onto the rolls. We don't have that anymore. And if you have photo ID, you know who you are. It's about as secure as it's going to get. Why not have same-day registration? Because that encourages young people to vote. It encourages people who are not likely to vote. And we don't want that.
Well, and there's two main reasons why we don't have same-day voter registration. And in fact, you might be aware that the Supreme Court just upheld, I'm sorry, the Circuit Court of Appeals just upheld in Ohio the legislature's elimination of the same-day voter registration in Ohio. They had this area of time where they called it the magic week, where you could register to vote at the same time that you could vote early. And the reason why we don't have that is because it is very possible for you to register to vote in Brazos County and register to vote in Tarrant County or wherever you were registered to vote and vote in both places and not have that ability to cast multiple votes, not just within 2 different jurisdictions in Texas, but also multiple states. There was in fact a case in Ohio and another one in Indiana where a person voted in multiple states because they registered to vote in those states. And there is a time, even though you're not handwriting voter registration cards onto the rolls, it does take some time to make sure that duplicate voters are not allowed to be registered in multiple places. But beyond that, Democrats unfortunately have opposed at every turn our ability to clean up this mail-in ballot problem that we have in this state. Because it does primarily benefit Democrats in the Rio Grande Valley and in other parts of this state. And the unfortunate thing is that regardless of race is not a factor in mail-in balloting, because we have Republican voters, we have Democrat voters who are over the age of 65. But we have, unfortunately, a system where people abuse people who live in nursing homes, in assisted living facilities. And we had a bill that Cindy Burkett, I think you were in the legislature at that time.
I had that bill killed.
Yep, and he had that bill killed that would have cleaned up mail-in ballot fraud. So
Wait, but okay.
no. So I think there is a lot that's true about what was said about weaponization of election laws. Democrats take the position that we're going to be opposed to any changes to our election laws that make the process more secure. Republicans take the position that we want to make elections as secure as possible to ensure that the public has confidence in it. And I think both parties are very entrenched in their positions. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think that there is a common ground that can be had on photo ID. Maybe Democrats don't believe that. I think there is a common ground that can be had on mail-in ballot reform. And I hope that we get there next session. Go ahead.
You can do it.
So,
then we'll
I think
open
we're having a
for
good discussion.
questions.
Yeah, so
and then
if you actually want to know what the Democratic proposals were for the voter ID, you actually can look at the court's record. You actually look at the court's opinions in striking down the Texas voter ID law. So what the courts actually said was, look, the reason why we know what your intent is, and how do we tell intent when people do things? We look at their actions. We look at what they did, right? Did you mean to punch that guy in the face? Well, you reared up, you faced him, and you smacked him. That's pretty good intent that you intended to hit him. So what the court did was they looked at what the legislature did when they passed this bill. On the floor of the House, and they went through the House record and said, look, when this bill was presented, Democrats actually provided amendments to this bill that would have done exactly what other states who have passed it and successfully defended it from the courts have done. And those were soundly rejected. The point is, all these measures to make voter ID, again, Democrats are not against voter ID. Democrats are against voter ID that makes it an unusual burden for a lot of people. People who don't drive, people who don't have bank accounts, people who don't have money, people who live 100 miles away from the closest DMV or their DPS office, right? These are real people. We're not talking about some imaginary person. You guys, as college students at Texas A&M, one of the premier universities in the world, you guys are already privileged. You guys are already like the top 10% of the world. But there's people that are below you that they don't have a lot of money. They could never dream of coming to college because they just don't have the ability to.
And these are the same people who do not have the ability to go take a day off of work to go get a license. These are people that if they have to reproduce their birth certificate, if they were born in Podunk, Texas, right, and they were born to a midwife, there's no birth certificate. They have to go make one. They have to go hire a lawyer to have one produced. They have to go to a court and demand that it be ordered produced. And they say, well, you can use the concealed carry license. Great, $150. So how much is it?
I was like $250.
$250.
Yeah.
$250 for someone who makes $7.25 an hour. Work that out in your head. Okay, so you're talking about a passport. U.S. passport is $175. $215 if you want it expedited. Right? With our little people down in Fifth Ward in Houston, they've never been outside Houston, much less outside the United States. This is not about the concept of voter ID. This is about the implementation and the process of how this is put into place.
And in response to that, I said, how much does the election identification certificate cost? Nothing
To get it.
to get it.
Yeah, the problem is you have to prove So to get an ID in Texas, you have to provide one of 6 available IDs. You have to have ID to get ID. Okay, think about that. So a
Well, it's not a photo ID.
lot of other states, what they allow you to do is if you have like a student ID with your picture on it and a phone bill that matches your name and address, good enough. And that's what the court said. The court said, look, all these other states have done this. They've made provisions for people who don't have money, who don't have cars, who don't have bank accounts, who for whatever reason in their life, they do not have these things and cannot afford to go get them. These other states made provisions for them to still be able to vote. And they're saying, like, Texas knew, when Texas did this, other states had already done all these other things. They had been challenged in other courts. Texas knew. How do you think Democrats knew what amendments to file? Because we already saw these other states have already done it. We said, hey, you guys are missing this in your bill. We're going to add it on with amendment. Vote it down. All right.
Okay.
Questions from the audience? In the back.
What are those 6 forms of identification to get the identification, if you can list them off, for example?
Like a previous driver's license, passport,
Birth certificate?
A citizenship certificate. What else?
I'll look at it in a second.
Concealed carry, military ID, and I don't know what else.
Birth certificate is one of those acceptable forms of identification. And they're not photo IDs necessarily.
Okay.
Now, a number of the IDs that he listed are the IDs that are allowed to vote without obtaining a different type of identification.
Yep.
So can you clarify what type of identification you're talking about right now? This extra identification? Right. You're talking about the voter identity, like the specific.
So
Yeah,
if you don't, if you don't have
EIC.
yeah, if you don't
election
have
identification
certificate.
Right.
So I don't know if you guys remember on my last
Well,
slide.
I have it from the Secretary of State.
Yeah,
from
the
DPS.
last slide had the last slide that I had a little ID on the side. That was the voting certificate. So like, if you don't have a driver's license, you don't have a passport, you don't have the military ID, you don't have whatever, then you can go to the DMV or the DPS office. I keep saying DMV for some reason. And they will, if you bring other folks' IDs, you can go get this voting certificate.
Representative Wood, I'll list out the 6.
Yeah, please.
Here, you can vote under the current law with a driver's license, with a personal identification card. That's if you're not a driver. Y'all probably know what those are. You might have had those before you got a driver's license. A concealed handgun license or license to carry, a U.S. passport, a military ID, or a U.S. citizenship certificate or certificate of naturalization. That's without obtaining the free EIC. In order to get the EIC, you only have to bring documentation to verify you're a U.S. citizen. So that could be a birth certificate, something like that. Some other documentation to verify your identity. Be eligible to vote in Texas, be a Texas resident, be 17 years and 10 months old. So, and there's a series of primary identification and secondary identification. Basically the same stuff it takes to get a job. Y'all know when you apply to get a job, you have to have certain forms of social security card, those sorts of things like that.
Except for all the people who are stay-at-home moms who have never left the house, who don't work. So one of the first examples of people who got hit by this were elderly women from rural areas, right? So think about why. Elderly, because they were born at a time when there were no birth certificates. They just weren't available, okay? Women, because women change their last names when they get married, right? So now you may have other forms of identification that don't match other things. You may have a birth certificate, but it doesn't match your driver's license or whatever else you have. And in rural areas, because a lot of things, if you live out in the boonies, a lot of things are done, like especially when you're born, whatever else, there's no record of it. How do you prove you were born, how do you prove that you're a United States citizen? One of the first cases come up was like a 96-year-old black woman who was born to a midwife, right? And I mean, like, I think literally born when they were still doing crop sharing. And they say, I can't prove that I'm a United States citizen under the Texas's current laws. Because you have to bring all these things just to get a driver's license. If you guys have gotten a driver's license recently, right? You guys all got driver's licenses under the new law. So you have to prove all those different things in order just to get a driver's license. And the thing is, you say like, well, who are these people? I mean, just because you've never met them doesn't mean they don't exist.
Well, and I'll give you the list. There's actually 26 different types of documentation that you can prove to support your EIC. A voter registration card, school records, insurance policy, vehicle or title or boat registration, military records, unexpired military dependent identification cards, social security card, pilot's license, marriage license, an unexpired photo driver's license. Well, of course, that will count automatically under the photo identification law. A Form W-2 or a 1099. An offender identification card from TDCJ if you are an ex-offender. A professional license. Any identification card issued by a government agency. A federal inmate identification card. A Medicare or Medicaid card. A selective service card. Everyone who's over the age of 18 gets, if they're a male, gets one of those. Immunization records. Tribal membership cards from a federally recognized tribe. A Veterans Administration card. A hospital-issued birth record, even if it's not a birth certificate. So it's ridiculously easy to obtain one of these forms of identification in order to get your election identification card. And overwhelmingly, even though we provided the opportunity across the state in many rural counties, less than 100 people have taken advantage of that. The overwhelming majority of people have these types of identification and are not disenfranchised by this. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Professor mentioned how many people
Just rep. I can't give you extra credit.
you mentioned how people don't have time and they also don't have the money to get a hold of these things, but
Yeah.
at the same time, half the time you go and apply for, say, welfare and then collect your checks once a month, and also you have to show forms of identification to apply for welfare. That would be able to register you to vote.
Yeah. Do you believe all black people are on welfare?
No.
Okay. So can we start with that assumption that not everyone is on welfare and needs...
People are like too poor to be able to afford to go out and vote because they also don't have the time.
So,
That's contradicting that statement.
so this is about the idea of the power of numbers, right? If you have a sufficiently large population, you know, you say like, I think you sit here, you think, I can't imagine a situation, right? But if you have a population like in Texas where you have 27 million people, and let's say like only half of them want to vote or are able to vote, right? You have, let's just say 10, 15 million people. Out of all those people, a certain percentage of them will fall into a specific category and will happen to have this type of situation in their life. And then, in fact, that's exactly what the court found. The court, through expert testimony, through calculations that the court found credible, believed that there were between about 400,000 to 500,000 people that have now been excluded. And how do we know? We can go and survey people. We ask them, hey, do you have this form of ID? If you don't have this form of ID, would you have the ability to go get it? And they survey people, and they ask them, and they can do calculations based on that, and extrapolate out to the larger population.
I love the I love Representative Wood, but I love the passive racism embodied in this concept. This concept that, and it was on the slide too, where it said race equals politics. I think that's laziness on the part of some of the opponents to photo ID, because race does not equal politics. I think that Democrats, unfortunately, make the presumption that every African American will vote Democrat and every Hispanic will vote Democrat, or that the overwhelming numbers of Hispanics will vote Democrat, when it simply isn't the case. Okay?
Not every, just 99 out of 100.
Oh, but let's take the example of Hispanic Texans. You know, Governor Perry, talking about Bad Dancer, Bad Dancer actually received close to a majority of Hispanic votes when he was elected governor.
In Texas.
In Texas. So to make that
But the
lazy jump that I think too many of the proponents of getting rid of these photo ID laws make is to say that this goes into racial discrimination. I don't think this is racial discrimination by any means. I think African Americans are just as capable of getting a photo identification as non-African Americans or Hispanic Texans are able to get photo identification. In fact, they have, the overwhelming majority of both groups have appropriate forms of photo identification to be able to vote.
And
it's not an impediment.
You don't have to take, I'm not calling anything racist. The courts are. The courts have already ruled on this over and over and said, yes, there is racial discrimination. It's not, you don't have to take my word for it, I'm nobody. I'm just some like low-level local elected official. You know, my word ain't worth jack, okay? You talk to the, talk to the courts about this. These are your federal judges who are way smarter than I am. This is their opinion. These are Republican and Democratic judges.
Well, and just like the opinion that I read to you from the Fifth Circuit review of Nelva Gonzalez-Ramos. He was a Obama appointee to the district courts. I don't think that there is a nonpartisan sheen to the federal courts. I think that overwhelmingly the presidential appointee of a district judge generally shares the same views of the president that appointed them. These cases break down on partisan lines, and that's why we have a number of these cases that are being filed right now, because we have an evenly split Supreme Court because of the vacancy created by Justice Scalia's death earlier this year.
No, these cases have been in court for years.
Yes, but that's where we're at right now in terms of...
Ours has been in court since 2011. I mean, that's not waiting for Scalia to die.
No, they didn't file them at that point in time, but I'm saying the reason you're seeing a lot of these come up at the circuits right now, and the split between the circuits, is because of the breakdown of the Supreme Court.
All right, let's get some more questions in here. Yes, ma'am.
On your topic of race equals party, I'm obviously not a racial minority, but it was still a struggle and a challenge for me to go to the DPS to get my license, but I could register to vote. And on racial minorities especially, they often work blue-collar jobs. And in blue-collar jobs, you have to request a day off so you can go and spend that time at the DPS, or you have to give up a shift, which can make you lose hours, which can make you lose full time. And to my knowledge, at this point, there does not exist federal provision that requires employers allow their employees time to go and acquire this ID, which is often another hurdle you have to jump over, even beyond the fact that employers are not required to give their employees time off to go and vote.
That's really funny because that's exactly what the court said.
So would the Republican Party or whoever is supporting this voter ID law, would they ever be interested in supporting a federal mandate that requires employers in the state of Texas to allow their employees a chance to get voter ID. Because Texas is a right to work state, so if you take unsanctioned time off, you can lose your job. So is there a way that the government is able to support a sanction like that?
Well, already Texas law prohibits an employer from having an adverse employment action or even firing a voter for taking time off to vote. It is a Class C misdemeanor to not allow a voter time off to go vote. And I think that while you could, as a prosecutor, interpret the ability to get the opportunity to vote as prohibiting someone from taking time off to vote, under the current law, I don't see anyone has ever brought that up last session.
There's never
or
even
in
been
the
a
last
prosecution of the law that way.
Well, I'll tell you, there was one up in Amarillo two election cycles ago of an employer who did not let a truck driver who worked for them off of their shift in order to vote during voting hours. They had a voting shift that or a work shift that lasted that entire 7-hour day.
I think election day should be a national holiday. Everyone can stay off, even at school. No, but
Yeah,
I forgot.
No, I think you could make the argument that is prohibited under state law right now. And I think that if you were to make an unemployment claim with the Workforce Commission, if after you were fired, you probably would be successful in making that unemployment claim if you were fired for that reason. But I don't see any reason why that law wouldn't be supported if somebody would have brought that to the legislature. Representative who disagrees.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Mr. Amelia?
Yeah.
Why isn't that law well publicized when you go to register to vote?
It's been on the books for over 40 or 50 years. I'm not aware of why it would be or why it wouldn't be publicized.
All right, can we have one more question? All right, you and the grayish green shirt.
So in respect to this gentleman's question, he never mentioned race whatsoever. And your response I thought was a little premature when you brought in, well, how do you think all black people are on welfare when he didn't mention race whatsoever in his question? Secondly, on your slides, you also stated that in Amendment 15, that it's a right of the U.S. citizen to go out and vote. Now, it is a right of a U.S. citizen to go out and vote. So, is there any way that, other than being able to go with your driver's license, is there any other way to be able to prove that you are a U.S. citizen, other than the facts or the way that you mentioned it? And if so, what do you propose that we do?
You know, this is one of those things that we've been voting this way for I don't know how many decades, years, whatever, okay? I'm not sure what the exact answer is. And again, if you want to look at what the right way to do it is, look at what other states have done. I will reiterate my point for like the 15th time. I'm not against voter ID. I'm against voter ID implemented in a certain way. Other states, including states controlled by Democrats, have implemented voter ID. There are ways to do this and do it right and do it without a discriminatory effect. Okay? Not discriminatory intent. Now, North Carolina, they got smacked down by the courts, and the courts said, we can prove you had discriminatory intent. Texas got struck down and just said you had a discriminatory effect. We didn't say you did it on purpose, but we know that it has a discriminatory intent. Discriminatory effect. Okay? So, when you're talking about this, you know, in fact, with you guys here, it's about right. So one of the big provisions that was involved in a lawsuit in the Texas law, and the courts made a big point about, was the student ID. They're talking about, look, you have all these students who have IDs issued by the government. Why are they not acceptable as a form of ID, right? Why is that not acceptable? The schools know exactly who they are, okay? And if that matches their voter registration card, why can't they vote with that? Because election laws are weapons. Because they purposely made it that way because they didn't want students to vote. They didn't want more students to vote. They made it harder because of that. And this is something that Eric brought up. It's like, well, we can add in student IDs and stuff that other states have done. Well, we offered that. That was offered when this bill passed. It was offered as an amendment to add in student IDs to allow to do it the other ways that other states have done it. There's ways to do this.
I could be wrong here, but every American citizen, they are issued a social security number and a social security card, am I correct? Every American citizen
No.
has a social security number.
No.
No, they don't.
Yeah, even the green card holders are issued social security numbers.
Okay, well, there's probably, Mr. Bell, you said there was, what, 26 different ways that you could obtain. Out of those 26 different ways, what is the probability that every, in the 250 some odd million Americans we have nowadays, what is the probability that, or the percentage of Americans that don't have at least one of those identifications that we could not be able to take to the voter poll, or to the DPS, or to the DMV, or whatever the case may be, to obtain a voter registration card, or anything along those lines? How is that so hard when there's 26 different options?
Well,
We're running out of time. So
I'll give you the 2 seconds.
The evidence is a fraction of 1%, less,
Yeah.
a infinitesimal amount. And he's right, you can get a Social Security card without being a U.S. citizen. So a Social Security card is not by itself proof of citizenship, okay? And a student ID by itself is also not proof of citizenship because there's a number of international students who get student IDs. And I think as long as there is an ability to verify identity and proof of citizenship as part of the process, I think there is no reason why people would be opposed to having additional forms of identification considered next legislative session.
I'll say the last thing is,
Yep.
the problem is with the fraction. The problem with the fraction is, in Texas, that fraction is about 300 to 500,000 people. So if that's fractional, if you're okay with that loss, if you're okay with that, then this is a great law. If you're not okay with 300 to 400,000 people not having the ability to vote, then you don't like this law. Numbers. Not just for dinner.
Once again, I would just like to thank you all for coming out and coming to our annual Constitution Day program. Please help me in thanking our guests for coming out tonight and sharing their experience and expertise.